Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. On January 28, 2011, the Tampa Police Department received a phone call from a woman who was worried about her daughter, Julie Schenecker. A devoted Army wife and mother of two, Julie had sent her mother an email that could be described as suicidal. When authorities arrived at the Schenecker home, they encountered a horrific scene. 16-year-old Calyx and 13-year-old Beau Schenecker were found dead, both of them shot, then covered with blankets. Upon questioning, Julie admitted that she was tired of the kids talking back and just wanted it to be over. Had her manic depression driven her to the point of insanity, or was hers a case of a cold, calculated violence and manipulation? This is the shocking true story of motherhood, mental illness, and 2 charges of murder in the first degree. The book that we're featuring this evening is Sleep, My Darlings, the true story of a mother who killed her children in cold blood, with my special guest, journalist and author, Diane Fanning. Welcome back to the program, and thank you very much for agreeing to this interview, Diane Fanning.
Terrific to be with you again, Dan.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Another great book, by the way, and our audience is in for a treat. Now, you portray, you paint a portrait of Julie Schenecker, and you've done exhaustive research here and had, of course, as usual, some incredible access to all the players that are the major players in this story. And I think it's important how long you spend and how exhaustive this research is to be able to tell us exactly who Julie Schenecker is. So tell us, start in the beginning, who is Julie Schenecker? What is her background? Where does she come from? What are her roots? Tell us about Julie Schenecker.
Julie Schenecker was basically a farm girl from Iowa, and she grew up out in the country, and she was very much liked. She was a very pleasant person. She was, as one of her high school classmates described it, the kind of daughter you wanted to have when you had children. Said everybody wanted to be Julie or to have a child like Julie someday. She was an athlete and a scholar and just an all-round nice person. There was nothing in her early years to foreshadow any of this. Then she went off to university and excelled again in sports or the volleyball team and did well academically. When she graduated, she joined the Army and went into Army intelligence. And she had a very high-pressure, prestigious position. She was based in Germany during the Cold War, and her job was to interview people that were coming out from behind the Iron Curtain seeking asylum. She was a Russian specialist, so she could speak fluent Russian, and she understood about the Russian culture, and she could communicate with these people and basically debrief them when they were trying to find asylum in the United States. And, you know, that was the kind of job that really required a lot from a person. It required a lot of intellectual ability and a lot of staying power. And as one of her coworkers said, everybody in that unit was a type A person, and they all worked. And then they played hard, too, with all the beer festivals in that part of Germany. And
Right.
She had a bike that she rode recreationally. She captained and coached the volleyball team. She was a very busy woman, and it was in that capacity that she met the man she would marry, Beau Schenecker. And after she started having children, she became a stay-at-home mom, taking care of her kids, traveled across the United States in different bases where her husband was posted, went to Hawaii for a while, and eventually ended up in Tampa, Florida, where her husband was a colonel in Army intelligence, and she was very socially active with friends, got involved in charitable events and volunteering there. She was not, from the outside, what anyone would have expected in the long term, in what actually happened. It was very much of a surprise to many people. People closest to her knew she was having problems, but I don't think anyone really understood the magnitude, severity, and life-threatening nature of what was going on with her. She was diagnosed bipolar, and bipolar people have a particular challenge, and that is to be able to stay on medications, because the temptation is so extreme to get off the medications, because they make, for a lot of people with bipolar disorder, they make everything kind of flat. And yes, the depressions of bipolar are horrible, but also the highs can feel wonderful when you're in them. And so it's difficult for someone with that problem to maintain their medication and keep on it. And Julie had a very difficult time with that, and she couldn't manage it. And after she was in a car accident, she got some pain pills, and so she was abusing those. She was self-medicating with alcohol. She was doing all sorts of things that would not even be good if you didn't have mental health issues, but when you do, it's even worse. And I'll be honest, Dan, when I sat down to write this book, I did not expect that I would have any compassion at all for Julie Schenecker in light of what she had done. But right. I found myself having a lot of compassion for her. It doesn't mitigate anything that she did. That is still absolutely horrible. But she really had a difficult condition. She was having trouble getting medications that were working right for her. And she really was, aside from what her mental illness did to her, a really nice and good person. And the drug abuse and the alcohol abuse combined with her mental condition created a monster.
Let's go back for our audience, though, because we've kind of skipped over the story to a certain degree, so we'll go back a little bit and tell a little bit more of it. What I found interesting is that I found it surprising what you just did say, that you found compassion for Julie Schenecker, and you initially didn't think that you would have any compassion for her, given the crimes that were committed. What I wanted to get into a little bit is that we want to know when exactly this mental illness was diagnosed, and exactly how serious was the disease that was diagnosed, and of course, what was she? You talked about hospitalization. Of course, she was on a certain amount of drugs, but I want to talk about later about the actual amount of drugs and different variety of drugs that were found at the Schenecker home after police were called to the home, and we're not at that point yet. So let's go back a little bit. When was she first diagnosed? I know it was around the time that they were married, but tell us when that first diagnosis was and what that diagnosis was specifically, and what was the course of action taken upon and recommended by the doctor at that time.
at the time she was diagnosed, which was in the early 90s, she was, it was recommended that she, take medication to treat her illness. The first thing was that the diagnosis first was depression. So she put her on an antidepressant. And that's very common with people who are bipolar, that their first, because that's when you go for help, is when you're depressed. You don't go for help when you're in the middle of the high. So it takes a while for a doctor to recognize that it's more than just depression. But it took a couple of years in her case. And she was, over the course of 20 years, medicated, hospitalized. She went into rehab for drug abuse. It was a situation that you would like to hope that she could be getting better, but it seemed like every step she took forward, eventually she'd slide two back.
There was no diagnosis, though, of violence or violent features to her bipolar disease, depression, or the bipolar diagnosis. There was no violent features in there, was there?
No, there were times that it was thought she might be dangerous to herself. Now, the last time she was hospitalized, she would not give the doctor permission to speak to her husband. And because of the HIPAA laws in this country, he couldn't do that without her permission. And I often wonder if Parker and her doctor could have talked openly and freely about what was going on with Julie, if that would have made a difference in the track of her life. If Parker had realized the seriousness of her condition, I'm sure he would not have left her alone with two kids and gone to Kuwait. He could have gotten a family emergency leave. He could have called a family member to come in and stay with them. I just think he was not able to be fully informed, and as a result of this, he now has no children. And that's really sad.
It's very sad, but I also, maybe it's just from living in Canada my whole life, I did have sympathy for Julie Schenecker, and where my sympathy was lying was, as the story unfolded, I said, I'd be awfully depressed myself. I've got a couple kids, and no one can really depict, because you didn't get to interview the children, obviously, what kind of family life they did have when they were all together, or what kind of family life they had when they were apart. But certainly a move must be traumatic for children. It also must be traumatic for a wife. She gave up a career. She was a very important military. She had a very important military career too. So it wasn't that she gave up something that wasn't a real passion of hers. She gave this up, traveled the world. I guess she obviously knew that he was a career military man, and she understood that. But I think it's depressing just by nature of him not being there very often, and her dealing with a teenager and two teenagers actually, and all the things that go along with a marriage or maybe a life just not so fulfilled. I thought that was part of, I think, the thing that you probably couldn't get to unless you really spoke to Julie, and maybe that's just my imagination.
Well, I do think she had multiple stressors in her life. The frequent moving is stressful. Selling a house, buying a house is stressful. Having teenagers in the house is stressful. Being separated from your spouse is stressful. And so, she had a lot on her for any person. If she was a friend of yours, you'd be sympathizing with her a lot because she carried a heavy burden. And I think that a lot of people often don't realize. They look at a woman who gives up a career and stays home and goes, isn't she lucky she doesn't have to work every day? But there is something there, particularly if you had a fulfilling job and a demanding job like she did. You lose a piece of yourself and of your self-identity.
Sure.
And you don't have as much fulfillment. I think when you're a parent and you look back at your parenting when it's over, and you see that your children have turned out to be really fine adults, and you go, wow, that was really fulfilling. But on a day-to-day basis, you don't really feel that so often. You know, it's because there's so much detail and drudgery that goes along with it you've got to take care of. There are happy moments, there are loving moments, there are a lot of things, but it's not necessarily fulfilling except when you look back and see what you've accomplished. Whereas a job that you enjoy and love can be fulfilling on a pretty regular basis.
Right. Now, two things I thought were important as well is that, and you know, this is not the chronological order of the book, but I wanted to talk about when police actually go to the home, and we'll leave the murder in a few minutes, but this variety of drugs and the volume of drugs that were there. Now, I understand people being prescribed antidepressants, but I'm not going to ask you off the top of your head the variety and the amount of drugs that were there, but safe to say that there was, say, 3 antidepressants, at least a couple very, very strong, Oxycontin, Codone, whatever it's called.
Yeah, there were the painkillers, which I do not think that her regular doctor was aware of all the medications she was taking. I think she had different doctors, one because of her accident, and then her regular doctor. I think she had multiple doctors prescribing for her, and nobody knew the whole picture. But she did have 3 antidepressants. She did have a couple of anti-anxiety drugs, some painkillers, top that off with just some of cold medications, which can make you a little loopy just by themselves. And all of that thrown together along with lithium, and it was just a nightmare pharmaceutical display all over her house. I mean, they found pills on the bed, they found them in the bathroom, they found them in her purse, and then on top of that, they go in the kitchen and the trash cans full of empty beer cans and wine bottles. And this was a woman that was obviously at the end of her leash, and she was self-medicating in a very destructive way. And she had, yes, 2 very, very good children. They were well-liked. They were well-adjusted for teenagers. And they weren't causing any serious problems like going out and doing drugs or getting arrested or anything like that. But the friction between a 16-year-old daughter and a mother is often very extreme. And in this case, I think that Julie's mental illness played a role in it being even more extreme. Calyx was trying to get into a boarding school because she did not want to live in the house with her mother anymore. There was no story, though, of any conflict with Beau. And that was kind of odd that she did kill Beau, because there had never been any indication of conflict between them.
The thing is, it doesn't really, again, we should just wait for a moment in terms of this. I'm trying to paint the picture that you have for the book with Julie. There is nothing in Julie's background that would predict anything like the last bit of her life. And so there is
No.
credibility to this insanity. And in terms of all the cases that you've covered and all the cases that I have looked at, this is still, and I think you write about this as well, is that this is not typical. This is not the typical person that kills their children as well. And these are not the...
It's
Go ahead,
not
sorry.
the typical person that would kill her children. There is no, I mean, usually when teenagers are killed, there's a history of violence towards them. There are 2 incidents of her slapping her daughter. That is it. And those were shortly before she committed this final act. Also, when you look at mothers who kill their children, the younger the child is, the more likely that a mother will kill the child. By the time children are teenagers, it's extremely rare for a mother to do that. If teenage children are killed by a parent, it is almost always the father. So this is extremely unusual.
Now tell us what happens a little bit before this murder. There is concern from Parker Schenecker about his wife. Of course, not enough to delay or postpone or cancel his work overseas in the military. But tell us what he does do. There's an email. There is talk among the families, and I found this very shocking, and some of it from her own brother. Tell us a little bit about conversations and how long that was before this tragic event.
Well, right before the event, I mean, days before he left the country, he was talking with the family about how she had the judgment of a 10-year-old, and no one was disagreeing with him. And they were wondering if he just had enough and couldn't take anymore and was going to be leaving her because of her drug abuse and having to be put into rehab and getting into an automobile accident by driving crazy and drinking and driving and not being responsible for the children and at times, and the family was getting garbled messages from her, and they knew that her own family knew that she was not doing well, and yet Parker was the kind of guy, if you said, yes, I will do this, yes, I can do this, no problem, he was going to believe you. And so when he asked Julie, will you be okay if I go on this 10-day deployment to the Middle East? And Julie said, yeah, for that time, I can handle that. And so Parker said, okay, well, then I won't be gone long, just 10 days, I'll be back. And I'm sure he never anticipated for one moment that she would not keep her word. But unfortunately, she meant something entirely different than what he thought. Before we get into the actual planning, which puts a big monkey wrench into any kind of insanity defense, that's for sure. I wanted you to convey to the audience, because again, this is a dynamic that was awfully shocking to me, is how this is a very religious family. We haven't spoken about that, and that permeates itself all the way through the entire story after the children are murdered and way beyond. But there's a letter from her brother, I believe his name is Dave, to Julie. And what is the tone of that letter from her own family member? And I think this may hopefully explain the kind of impression I got from this family dynamic. Well, basically, he was telling her to shape up. That, he had no more patience with her, and this is so common in how family members react to someone with a mental illness. They expect them to pull themselves together and stop jerking around and stop, like her brother felt that she was because of the way she was acting, she was causing Parker to retire before he made general, and that had been Parker's desire for years and years, and everybody in the family knew he wanted to be a general. And so it was all, look what you're doing to Parker, and look what you're causing him to give up. And nobody was really looking at what she'd already given up, for one thing.
Right. And
nobody was ever looking at the mental illness as not being some sort of weakness, but a serious biochemical problem.
And I think that this, maybe I'm going to get ahead of myself if I comment on that. Anyway, now there are some. I just mentioned that there are some plans. There's some premeditation here that really makes you wonder when you're following this story, and it's amazing how it's laid out, and it's very, very surprising that this happens. Tell us about the premeditated plans for murder.
Well, when Parker left on his deployment, Julie went 3 counties away to a gun store. I mean, there were a lot of gun stores closer to her home, but she chose this one that was a little further away. She went in and she bought her gun and was very disappointed to find out that she had a 3-day waiting period. So she went home and wrote in her journal, "The massacre will have to be delayed." And so it was obvious, usually in most possibilities of domestic violence, that 3-day waiting period can save lives because it's sort of a heat of the moment kind of thing. I'm going to kill my wife, and they go out to get the gun to kill her, and if they can get it right away, they come home and kill her. But if they have that waiting period, they think better about it. With Julie, though, that waiting period didn't impact her state of mind. And I know that for the prosecution who's trying to get the death penalty, that they say that proves premeditation, and she deserves to die for it. And I disagree with that, in that I think that she was in a state of mental illness, unclear thinking, through all of what they're calling premeditation. And yes, it is premeditation, but it was all created by a near psychotic state of mind.
Well, good luck with that. But
yeah.
Now, the thing is that she waited the 3 days. She got her gun, bought her ammunition, and these guys were key guys testifying, or at least giving their testimony to police, and that was part of the evidence gathered against her. Now, what does she do, and on what day and under what circumstances? Take us back to that fateful day and recreate that horrible experience for us.
It was a Thursday in January, and towards the end of January, and she picked up the gun at the gun store. She came home when it was time to take Beau to his soccer game. She was driving down the road with him and suddenly fired a shot into the windshield, which terrified Beau. And he turned towards her and pleaded with her to put down the gun, and she shot him in the head. Then with him sitting there, she drove home, parked the car in the garage, went into the house, walked up the stairs to where Calyx was busy in front of the computer working on her homework, shot Calyx in the head. When Calyx swung around in an automatic physical response, she was shot again in the face. She was sitting on a rolling chair, and Julie rolled her down the hall and into her bedroom, picked her up and laid her in bed, got a white cat blanket out of the cabinet in the bathroom and stretched it out over her. Put the chair back where it belonged at the desk. Got another white blanket. Went downstairs out into the garage and covered up Beau. Then she went and detailed everything that happened in her journal. She sent some very, very garbled text messages and email messages. And then sometime after that, she had written that she was going to commit suicide. That was going to be the final act of violence that night. But instead she passed out on the concrete apron of the swimming pool. And it was the next morning that police found her there.
Now, in the journal, was there talk of why she wanted to kill the children?
She said that she was tired of them talking back, and it had to end.
That was it.
And
really?
That was it.
Now, did she send an email to Parker just sort of foreshadowing this?
She sent an email to Parker telling him to hurry home. They missed him. And that was after she killed the children.
Incredible. Yeah.
Now, Parker's viewpoint in his lawsuit was that she did that to torment him. But the other possible meaning of that is that she was already in total denial about what she had done. And in a lot of cases of mothers killing children, there is often a plan of suicide, but the emotionally draining nature of shooting their kids or killing their kids, whatever way they do it, is it just wears them out and they have absolutely no energy, and it's very often they go to sleep or pass out.
Now, before we get to this lawsuit, because, again, I found this quite shocking, and some of the behavior as well, tell us about the course of events, because early in your book we talk about how the police are first notified, and tell us about that. How many, you say Julie passes out by the pool. Tell us about the other course of events that come for the police and for the family to discover Julie Schenecker and the horror that...
Well, Julie had not really told anyone what she was going to do. I mean, so it was a big surprise to everybody and how they found out. She did send an email to her mother that saying this is all got to end, and it sounded to her mother as if Julie could have been contemplating suicide. Her mother did not suspect that she would ever do anything to harm the children. So it was her mother that called the police because she was very worried. Her mother, who lived in Iowa, was vacationing in Texas, and she called the Florida police to go check on her daughter. And they did go over there, and the police, I mean, they thought the worst thing they would find is a suicide. That was, the only thing that they could imagine. So when they found, the first body they found was Calyx's upstairs in the bedroom. And at that point, since Beau was not in his bedroom, they had great hope that Beau would be found hiding somewhere scared. But instead they found him dead in the car.
Now, what was Julie's reaction when they did discover her there? You describe in the book, what was her behavior? What was her reaction when police found her there?
Well, at first, I mean, she identified herself, and they asked to go into her house, and she said that was fine. But then once they all got into the house, she started fighting the police. They ended up having to forcibly cuff her because she was resisting them. But eventually she told them what she had done. She told them that they were talking back and she wasn't going to take it anymore.
Now, what is Parker's reaction? How does he find out how long after, and what is his immediate reaction?
Parker found out while he was deployed overseas that his family was gone, basically, and he came right back. He was due to come back anyway, actually. But he went to the base, and he was there for the community memorial service, for the one that the military had. He was also willing to go to Fort Worth for the official funeral. He was there. He spoke at all of these. He was very open to Beau and Calyx's friends, and was very welcoming to them. He would go to games that were played by Beau's soccer team and cheer the kids on there. When March came around and the event that Calyx was in charge of for the American Heart Association, he showed up and he did the walk with all of the kids, and he was there all night with them, just as he would have been if Calyx was there. And he gave a big donation through the foundation he started for Calyx and Beau. He gave a big donation to that event, the Relay for Life. And he has been very involved with those children and with his foundation, and wanting to do good things in the name of his children.
My question is that who visited Julie Schenecker? And Parker, how long was it before he visited Julie Schenecker, and what was the nature of the visit once he did visit her?
Well, when they first got together, it was right after the two memorial services and the funeral. He went into the jail to visit her, and normally in the jail, all visits were by closed-circuit television, and you never actually physically saw the people, but they made special arrangements so he could actually sit down in the same room with her. And he talked to her about the memorial services and about all the kids and all the love for Calyx and Beau, and he updated her on all of that, and then he informed her that he was filing for a divorce. And she seemed to take it okay at that time. She just nodded her acceptance, and he pretty much thought she was okay with it. And then the demands started coming from her lawyer as far as what she would get out of the divorce. They wanted money immediately to pay for her defense, and they wanted him to have a life insurance policy with her as the beneficiary, and it seemed very odd to me that all those demands would be made, that anyone would expect a father to pay for the defense of the person who took his children's lives.
I was surprised that the court didn't. I was surprised that these cases were sort of mixed up a little bit, or not a little bit. They were kind of connected in terms of if she's looking for proper defense and she has to raise the money, the funds to be able to do that, and she gave up a career, she's entitled to a substantial portion of his, or 50% of his earnings. And so I thought that it was odd that this type of civil case was, again, connected with the criminal case in terms of if she has success with this, then she might have the funds to be able to defend herself much better. I found it odd. I found it odd that these trials
Yeah,
had
the whole
anything to do
thing
with each other.
The whole thing was very odd in that, on the one hand, you look at Julie, who gave up her career for the sake of their family, and yet that would say, on the one hand, that she deserves half of their assets, just flat out,
sure,
without question.
Right.
But on the other hand, the only reason her husband is getting a divorce at this point in time is because she killed their children. So in order to divide that money, that means that half of the money he earned is not just going to his estranged spouse, it's going to the killer of his children. So it brought all sorts of emotions into it that shouldn't have been there to look at it objectively.
I'll tell you, I find it odd, and again, anyone that listens to this program knows I'm not a bleeding heart liberal by definition, but I found it odd that Parker didn't visit his wife. It's almost like he's married to this woman, but she is the nanny. She is diagnosed with mental illness, and there is, again, the letter with Dave and some intimation with Parker as well, and from the family that somehow, or Parker had said that, well, she was mentally ill before I got married to her. She was damaged goods. So somehow trying to wash their hands of this woman somewhere along the line after she's been a caregiver, but she's been a lot more than a caregiver. And the thing that I found missing from your book, and again, I guess it's just how much can you really get, but the one thing that just gnawed at my brain was, what kind of relationship did he have with his wife? It didn't seem like he had much of a relationship with his wife, really. And then at some point when she commits this, of course, a heinous crime, the most intolerable crime of all, it's like he didn't have a wife.
There was some suspicion to me that things were, in addition to the notes, he didn't have his wedding ring with him when he went overseas. It was in the bathroom. Now, I believe there was a story put out that, he didn't wear his wedding ring when he was deployed, and that was just a habit. And so I don't know if anything can be read into that, but it almost seems symbolic to me. And yes, he seemed to have absolutely no respect for her as a person anymore. And you wondered how long that had built up. Was that just a result of recent events, or is it more of a reflection of how he saw her more as an underling than as a partner? And you don't know, because even if he did, he's not going to admit it. And she's in no state to talk.
Another question I had, too, was that given what you just admitted, that it may have been the situation in that he didn't respect her enough in this marriage, and that certainly didn't help her mental disposition at all, her mental state whatsoever. But this also could have been passed to the children, where the children saw the father as this sort of hero role compared to the mother that was the drunk, the pill taker, or the insane mother. One of those three, and again, not to say that the normal stresses and strains of a relationship between a mother and a teenage daughter would not be enough, but if the father didn't have enough respect for his wife, referring to her as having the decision-making capabilities of a 10-year-old, maybe that was rubbing off on Calyx as well. Do you think there might be something to that?
It seemed as if Parker was taking Calyx's side in her conflict with her mother, which is always a bad thing in a family when that's going on. And if he had an attitude towards his wife that was anything short of what a spousal relationship should be, then yes, the children are going to pick up on that. They always do. Children pick up more than we know, and when they're teenagers, they pick up even more. And perhaps some of her disrespect for her mother, although some of it's natural for teenagers, maybe some of it was a reflection of how her father was feeling. It seemed like that relationship was clearly on the rocks. If the children were still living, would they still be married? Maybe not. Maybe they would have separated regardless of what happened. It's hard to know.
The thing I think that we should let the audience know is that this email that I spoke about, where the brother was chastising his sister, and to me it was, I would have called my brother and said, listen, you don't be talking to me ever again, because I couldn't believe the tone that he was using as a brother to his grown sister, responsible sister, and talking to her like this was wrong on so many levels. But tell us, didn't she ask and then get the contents of that letter?
Oh, yes. She wanted to see it. She asked for all that email to see copies of it. And initially she was told no, and then Parker said, go ahead, let her see it. And so she saw it. I mean, she knew, and quite frankly, I think she had to have been feeling as if she was pretty much all alone in the world, and you know, there was nobody for her to turn to. It seemed like they were all ganged up against her to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, again, I understand that, the insanity defense, again, you pointed it out in your book, less than 1% of all the murder cases, trials, an insanity defense is put forward, and out of that, a fraction of that 1% actually succeed with the insanity defense. So I don't know if it's worth doing, but certainly a defense lawyer has a responsibility to defend his client to the best of his ability, and if he believes his client to be insane, then certainly he should present insanity defense. Now, with
the
this
problem
insanity
is I think that there's a difference between being medically insane and legally insane, and it always doesn't make sense psychiatrically when they say that you're legally sane.
Well, you can. What the difference is that in different jurisdictions in Canada, the insanity defense is successful quite a bit. And what I sent you in an email, just for an example of a case that I covered on a program itself, it was a Dr. Turcotte from Montreal, Canada, or Quebec anyway, the province of Quebec in Canada, and he had killed his 2 children. Again, we won't get into the details, but it's comparable enough in that a respectable, otherwise law-abiding, I don't believe he was diagnosed previous to this with any kind of mental illness, but he used the insanity defense as this temporary insanity, and he was successful with it, and he was released after 4 years from a mental institution. So you can see that there's a difference in jurisdictions using that, and certainly if that worked once, then it can work again, and the precedent has been set. And there is many different insanity defenses that have been used in this country successfully. So you can see that, and you write about it in your book as well, that there's a reason why juries don't go along with this, even though they are sane and logical and intelligent and have been instructed otherwise. As you write in your book, they're fearful of maybe possibly somebody letting these people out again. So they're afraid of the person that's insane.
Well, Dr. Michael Stone, who is a forensic psychiatrist and does a lot of work in a hospital for the mentally insane, a prison hospital, he says that Julie Schenecker definitely is mentally ill and should be found not guilty by reason of insanity, but that she is the type of person that should never be let out of the institution again, because she cannot control herself sufficiently and cannot be trusted to take medications if she ever were stabilized.
Now, with your experience with these death penalty cases, these capital cases, and with, how many women are actually executed and how many women are actually sentenced to death, given all the mitigating circumstances that are involved here and the kind of counsel that she may have, what do you think the chances are that the death penalty will be her sentence?
I think it's highly unlikely that a jury would give her the death penalty. Quite frankly, I think it's a little bit of overreach by the prosecution too, and it seems as if perhaps the only reason they are seeking the death penalty is in order to have a jury that tends to side more with the prosecution, as death certified juries do. I really believe that, if we're going to have a death penalty and we're going to be executing people, then it should be reserved for the kind of people that, like Tommy Lynn Sells in that book I wrote, Through the Window. He's somebody who gets actual pleasure from killing, and he just kills over and over again, and that is just what he likes to do. That is his reaction to stress. He tortures and kills. And although the murders of her two children were horrible, and they both had a moment of total terror in their lives and betrayal, they were not tortured. They died quickly. And I really think that if you're going to kill a person for taking a life, it should be reserved for the most severe cases. And this, horrible as it was, just did not measure up to the horrors that have been inflicted on people by those like Tommy Lynn Sells.
Yeah, no, you're right. And the thing is, I think it's overreach as well by the prosecution in terms of this is not, again, the typical kind of person that you would find being on death row, again, going and putting blankets on her deceased children and not doing anything of the jackal-type sort of thing that serial killers and some heinous, vengeful killers do. This is a clear case of mental illness having some, something to do with this case, and at least that will be a mitigating circumstance. And like I say, in other jurisdictions, at least I know in Canada, the jury would be feeling sympathy for Julie Schenecker, and they would bring up all the kinds of things some of the kinds of things that we'd spoken about today. And I wanted to say, too, as well, is the defense has already spoken about in terms of this statement that they have in terms of Parker's responsibility. Tell us about the contents of the gist of what that statement is in terms of Parker's responsibility in the murder and the deaths of his own children.
Well, they pointed to Parker and what he said about Julie, like not having the judgment of a 10-year-old, and saying that it was extremely irresponsible for him to have left her with those children, to take care of those children, and totally in charge of them, that she should have never been left there alone with them. And maybe they are right, but I think that Parker was blinded a bit because he didn't have full disclosure from her physician about the state she was in. I think that he never, for one moment, thought that she would physically harm the children in any way. And I think it's a little harsh on him, but by the same token, going for the death penalty for her is a little harsh. I really don't think the defense is going to succeed with the insanity defense, and I also don't think the prosecution is going to succeed with the death penalty.
Right. Well, I mean, I believe that you're correct, too. There's enough mitigating circumstances that she is very unlikely to get the death penalty, I believe. And certainly the insanity defense has too many, the premeditation, again, that just throws everything out the window. The planning
throws it off, yeah.
And what you wrote in the book, too, is that when they were set for court, too, there was initially some data retrieved from emails and all computer data, and then, of course, there was a snafu in terms of nobody could read the data, and then they realized this is going to take a year to look at the data and read the data and prepare the data, and so, again, they're going to be rolling up their sleeves for a big protracted trial. I hope, though, because I don't know. I mean, I haven't done the research in terms of what's the media doing in terms of this story. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. But how big is this story, do you believe, going to get by the time it gets to trial? There's other trials that have captivated the American audience, but do you think this may captivate the audience and raise the issue of mental illness? Or what do you think about it, the prospect of the media latching onto the story in any kind of big way?
I'm hoping that it does raise awareness of the problems with mental illness. I don't, and it all depends on how the media handles it. It can be handled so that some sort of ugly shadow is cast on anyone that has mental illness, and people tend to forget that the average person with mental illness never hurts anyone. People with depression, who they hurt usually is themselves when they commit suicide, but most people with mental illness are not violent. It's a possibility with a small percentage. And I think that if the media focuses on her mental illness by pointing out red flags and danger signals and the importance of noticing things in your family and friends and those around you, that maybe it can serve a very good purpose if we can get people to realize that mental illness isn't something that someone can just get over. It isn't something that you can just pull yourself up out of it and, stop messing around and just act normal. It just doesn't happen. And we need to take it more seriously and encourage people to get help and not expect them to do it all on their own. People with mental illness need strong family support, and they also need strong professional support.
I think the lesson in this as well is that one of the striking events that happens in this book, in this story, is that when police find all the medications, and there's, again, voluminous amounts of pills, 3 type of antidepressants and a couple of the most potent painkillers on earth, that alone can create some things. Every recreational drug user, every prescription drug overuser knows that. But again, whose finger are we going to point? Who are we going to point the finger at? If she's also drinking and she's combining alcohol, not too many juries are sympathetic about that. The thing that I have the sympathy for and the understanding, again, I can't comprehend murder and I can't justify it. I can just say that there certainly was some circumstances that obviously led to this, and you do a great job of having access to that and telling that story. But the thing is, what I found is that it almost seemed like this poster perfect family, this military man, and that even after the murder of his kid, it's all more, to me, this is my impression, that it was all more about impressions. It was all about image. It was more about ritual. He's a military guy. He's a religious person, and then they have these fundraisers, and then they dress all in Harry Potter costumes and all these memorials. But yet he didn't have any time, any comprehension, any compassion or empathy for his wife whatsoever. The mother of his children, the person that he was with, he didn't contemplate divorce before this. He wrote this email and then was silly enough to think that somebody wouldn't just blow their top reading the email. And the brother is chastising her. So all I know is that if you want to push someone and push them away and treat them like nothing, despite this image that's probably still out there of Parker, Schenecker, and the angelic kids is that somebody should have a little bit of sympathy for this mother. That's my impression out of this whole thing.
You know, I really have compassion for the whole family.
Sure.
You know, and it is hard for me to put myself in any of their shoes and try to understand or try to say how I would react in any of their positions and with any of their burdens. And I just am glad, I'm grateful that I never had to face this of a spouse who killed my children. I am grateful that I never had to carry the burden of serious mental illness. And I'm glad that I never had to live with a parent who was abusing drugs and alcohol like that. I mean, you know, everybody in that family had a difficult road to hoe. And I think that there should be enough compassion for all of them.
Yeah, I just see it odd that the courts are involved in the civil suit and the criminal case, which is connected to the civil suit, in terms of he wants to not support, again, you say like the killer of his children, yet it's still the mother of his children at the same time. And she could have a bushel full of money. She could use every penny that he had. It still wouldn't get her free. She wouldn't be a free woman. So defense is only really all she can ever hope to get is a fair trial and taking in, you know, the circumstances of her mental illness and considering them in the sentencing itself, because she is facing the death penalty or facing the rest of her life in prison without any kind of possibility of parole. So these mitigating factors, such as mental illness, may make the difference between life and death for this woman. So.
Yeah. It is a shocking situation to see a woman who is solid middle class, upstanding in her community, with a background of no violence, is really facing nothing that you would have ever imagined for her to be facing as she goes into her 50s.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. I thought when I first read this that I think I can tell what's going on from just the basic details. And again, you've done an admirable job of sucking the reader, myself, right into this story. And it's an incredible journey that you take us in to find out who Julie Schenecker is. And this is where all this empathy comes from. Again, I'm not a bleeding heart liberal, but you've brought that character to life and showed so much humanity in expressing who she really was and really is even at this time. And so I have that empathy for this woman. And again, you're right, I should really feel equally for everybody involved here. It's just a strange situation, sort of a slice of American life that if you look on the underbelly of it, it's not so picturesque.
Yes. Things are not always what they seem.
Yeah, certainly. Now, Diane, we just got a couple minutes. I wanted to congratulate you, too. This is your 20th book, Sleep, My Darlings?
Yes, it certainly is.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah. I have a hard time believing it myself sometimes. I would have never imagined.
How many? You've had 20 books, been in how many years has that been spanned over?
It's been in 12 years.
In 12 years, wow. That's very, very prolific, like a machine. I want to thank you very much, Diane, for coming on the program once again and talking about this, your latest and greatest, Sleep, My Darlings. Again, great job, and thank you for this interview.
Thank you, Dan. It was great talking to you again.
Now, do you have, maybe you could just leave our readers with a email address or Facebook, or how's best to contact you and find out about new and latest and greatest projects and things coming up in the near future for you?
My Facebook page is real simple. It's just the regular Facebook address with the slash on the end, Diane.Fanning. My email is Diane@DianeFanning.com. My website is DianeFanning.com. So if you can spell my name, you can find me on the Internet. And if you're not sure how to spell my name, just go online, find one of my books, and read the cover. So it's pretty easy.
You're easy to find.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Dan, and have yourself a great evening. And thank you very much again for this interview.
Sure thing. Thank you, Dan.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.